This next panel I'm really excited about as well. How do you follow an all-star panel like we just had unless you have another all-star panel? And of course we absolutely do. And I'm so excited that we've been joined by this distinguished group of people that have tremendous experience in the executive branch of the federal government and can help guide us as we prepare for an opportunity in 2025 and 2026 to really reshape the path forward so the people and the states can reclaim their rightful role as the leaders in this country. So we can be energy independent and dominant, so we can protect our environment while we utilize the great assets that God has given us in the West. So I want to hand the microphone to my wonderful colleague, the senator from Nebraska, Pete Ricketts, who has a unique perspective because he has been both a private citizen and a governor, the two most important prongs of our triangle, and now is a distinguished member of the United States Senate. So let's all welcome Pete Ricketts.
Well, thank you very much, Cynthia, and thank you all very much for being this morning to talk about these incredibly important issues, because this does impact where our country is going to be going. Are we going to continue to be able to have a great nation that is prosperous, or are we going to allow ourselves to be taken over by these radical environmentalists that really want us to go backwards in time and really would just prefer not to have humans on this planet in the first place? So, as a governor, one of the things that I saw was the overreach of the Obama administration. And one of the things that we were able to do is be able to sue them. So for example, in waters of the U.S., the EPA was trying to stretch the meaning of navigable waters to include things such as roadside ditches, farm ponds, puddles on construction sites, all things that were clearly not navigable. And so we had to take them to court to be able to stop that. And then we were able to get an injunction for a few states that took them to court. And then, of course, the Trump administration came in and rewrote the rule in the proper way. Now the Biden administration has gone back again. That lawsuit's continued, and we actually won in court where the court decided, yes, navigable actually does mean navigable. It means you have to be able to take a photo on it. That's not what the EPA can do. But that process took 8 years. And it's a necessary process, and it's one of the things where the states can play a vital role in doing that. But we also, if we're going to have the opportunity with the new Trump administration to stop some of this stuff, we'd move quickly in the first 100 days. And one of the things we have to do there that I want to hit upon is what Biden did when he first came into office. He wrote an executive order about the 30 by 30 program. Now they've changed the name to Keep America Beautiful or whatever. But the idea is they truly want to put 30% of the United States into conservation. So when Jim's talking about some of these changes that the BLM is trying to do and prevent people from using roads and stuff like that, this is all part of that 30 by 30 plan. Now, they will come out and say that because they don't want to scare people, but that's exactly what they're trying to do. When you see the Rock Springs RPM really being restrictive, that's part of the 30 by 30 plan, to take public lands and restrict them from other people's use. And if you ask the administration, well, what do you mean by conservation? Well, with 30% of the country in conservation, they won't give you a definition because they don't want you to know. But that executive order is part of what's driving all these rules and regulations and these bureaucrats from trying to stop us from leveraging the natural resources we have in our country. And if we do that, that is a national security issue. Right? We talk about Ross Adam buying our uranium supplies, right? That's a national security issue. We have very dangerous adversaries in the world today. People's Republic of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. 3 of those force countries have resources that they're leveraging right now, right? Russia and Iran with its oil, China with its critical minerals. And at the same time where we have an administration saying, well, once you use electric vehicles, they're passing things like the Clean Power Plan 2.0, which we have to get rid of, that is restricting our energy use. They are not allowing us to develop our minerals. So for example, Amber Road in Alaska, they shut that down. An electric vehicle takes 4 times as much copper as a regular internal combustion engine, and yet they're shutting it down. So on the one hand, they're saying, use electric vehicles. On the other hand, they're saying, well, we're not going to let you have energy. We're not going to let you have critical minerals. What does that do, folks? It puts us all dependent on our adversaries of the world. That's a very, very dangerous place to be. So we have to undo this. One of the first things in the new Trump administration is undoing the executive actions of the Biden administration. And then, as I think about this as kind of a governor thing, going back into those agencies, and to the extent you can, cleaning house, but then also start working on how do you get rid of the people who aren't just political appointees, how do you get them to do what you want them to do? Well, you have to have managers come in and start putting systems in place to hold them accountable for doing what you want them to do. That means actually managing the people, right? We had to do this when I was governor of Nebraska. When I walked into the office, I said, can I have the job description for every reports to the governor? They didn't have any. They weren't doing annual reviews. They didn't have any metrics for how people did stuff. That's the kind of stuff we need to have in all of our agencies where we're driving our agenda through those metrics. Putting people say, hey, here's what you have to do. It's measurable. It's around our agenda. And if you don't do it, we're going to start writing you up. And if you consistently don't do it, we're going to fire you. You can fire civil servants. But you can't fire anybody unless you put measurements in place to say, here's how you do your job. And if you're not doing your job, we can start doing progressive discipline to move you out. Now that's a longer term process, but that's part of what we want to do. If we want to stop seeing these radical environmentalists in these agencies pushing this agenda, we've also got to start holding those bureaucrats accountable for doing what the Trump administration wants to do. And so I'd love to hear Andrew talk about this, because this is my theory. This is based on what I did. He actually, ran the EPA, so he's going to have some thoughts about, okay, that's what it does in the real world. So that's what part of the way I think about it is like, hey, we've got some really dangerous, we have really far left environmentalists who are running this administration. They have a different agenda about where they see this country going. If we get the opportunity here, we've got to move fast to undo this as quickly as possible.
So, Governor, Senator, which do you prefer?
Well, I'm senator now. Somebody else got my own governor job.
We have 3 extremely distinguished panelists from the administration, the Trump administration. First, we'll hear from Andrew Wheeler, who is the 15th director of the EPA. And I have to say, I was not in Washington at all during the Trump administration. I was back home in Wyoming. And the 2 agencies that I saw run extremely capably by people who kept their heads down, did their jobs, worked miracles in a very short period of time without a bunch of drama. And it was Interior and EPA. And when EPA was run by Andrew Wheeler, he did an extraordinary job. And we need to pick up where you left off, Andrew. Help us learn how to do that. So our next speaker is Andrew Wheeler.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you both senators. And I got to work with Senator Ricketts when he was Governor Ricketts. First of all, I want to thank the Western Caucus for inviting me here today. I was at the Cheyenne Frontier Days 2 weeks ago. If you haven't been, highly recommend it. It's great to be here in Jackson Hole, which I understand is about a 30-minute drive from Wyoming. But I want to follow up on the anecdote from the first panel on former Senator Simpson just real fast, because it's great to see all the members here. And I worked with Senator Simpson and his staff when I was a congressional staffer. And I got to sit next to him at a dinner after we retired at the Kennedy Center School. He was a visiting fellow. And I was complimenting his staff when he was senator, and he was reminiscing about his staff. But he also told me that it was very important for members to learn the issues themselves. And he said he took that directive straight from the Bible, where it says, Aaron leaned on his staff and died. So that was, so it's great to see the members here as well as the staff. So how to start at the beginning of a second Trump administration? First of all, we have to look back at the beginning of the first Trump administration. In my opinion, we lost a lot of ground in 2017. We did not get off to a good start, particularly at the EPA. Several reasons. One, our EPA administrator, my predecessor, Scott Pruitt, was not confirmed until March of 2017. The next Senate confirmed person was not confirmed until October of 2017, and that was Bill Warren in the Air Office. We also listened to the career staff who told us, and also I believe PPO, that you can't have politicals running the offices until you have a Senate confirmed person in that office. So we had career staff running all of the offices for almost the entire 2017. We have to take back the Senate, and we have to make sure that we have people confirmed as quickly as possible. Yeah. Now, the Biden administration did not follow that. They put their people, politicals, in charge of all of the offices at the beginning. We need to do that as well, but we need to have the Senate confirmed people there as quickly as we can. When we were at EPA, working with my deputy, Henry Doran, we trained over 70% of the EPA staff in the lean management, also called the Toyota system, on how you manage staff. So the fundamentals are there for the career staff to hold their staff accountable, and that is really important. But you have to have the political people in place to move forward on these regulations. And there's a whole host of regulations, but I am going to put a little damper on that. It's going to be very difficult for an incoming Trump administration to overturn or reverse every regulation that people have concerns about. We're going to have to do this by triage, because there's also some important initiatives that President Trump will want to address as well. So there's going to have to be a balance as far as what are the important things to address, what can be done by executive order, what has to be done by a new regulation, and then what are the important things to move forward and stake out some new ground on. I think the two overarching principles for a second Trump administration in talking about the energy, environment, natural resources space is one, in making sure that we are energy dominant, and that is responsibility of at least a half a dozen different agencies. And then second is unburdening the federal permitting system as well as the regulatory system in order to grow the economy. In the previous panel, Pete did a great job talking about the fact that the high increase in oil and gas that we see today is not because of Biden's policies, it's because of decisions made during the Trump administration on opening up leases. The next administration is going to have, in probably 2 years, maybe 3 years, a real problem on oil and gas in this country, and we got to make sure that they are not blamed for that. We need to move forward on regulatory areas to open up more oil and gas exploration and development, but we have to understand that we're going to be starting 10 paces behind because of the actions of this administration. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. We'll have some questions for you later. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Rob Wallace. Rob was the highest Senate-confirmed appointee during the Trump administration who is from Wyoming. He is also my very dear and longtime friend. He was at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and had tremendous private sector background to bring to bear in the Trump administration. Rob, we're delighted you're here and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Senator, and welcome to Teton County. What'd you say, 30-minute drive?
From Wyoming.
Well,
I live here, so we'll have a beer on that after. How many people are here for the first time? Great. Well, as Senator Lummis knows, and all this travel around Wyoming, people like to say, hey, Teton County is not like the rest of the state. And I'm here to tell you that is correct. And when you're out with this wonderful program that Darrell and the staff have put together for you for the rest of the trip, look around where you are. You're in the home of, in this county, two of the world's most recognizable national parks in Yellowstone and Grand Teton. To the east and to the west, you see two national forests, U.S. Forest Service properties, three congressionally designated wilderness areas. There's a dam and a lake up in the middle of Grand Teton National Park run by the Bureau of Reclamation, whose responsibility is not to provide water for cutthroat trout fishing in Wyoming, but for agriculture in Idaho. As you probably all landed in the only airport in the national park, which is it's two times the visitation of any other airport in Wyoming combined. You were driven by a national elk refuge on the way into town, run by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in cooperation with Wyoming Game and Fish, which managed the park for different diseases. The Game and Fish is worried about brucellosis. The Fish and Wildlife Service, chronic wasting disease. It's two different management strategies. Requires a lot of coordination and cooperation at the highest levels of government. And also two ski areas that are also under permit from the U.S. Forest Service. So it's a really complicated area that you're going to be visiting. And it has it's like a smorgasbord of all the issues that Andy and Karen and everybody else dealt with in Washington. You've got invasive species that you have to deal with, requires cooperation. You've got endangered species. You've got housing issues, one of the most expensive places in the United States to live also requires firefighters, school teachers, snowplow drivers, all sorts of public services people that need to find a strategy on how to live here. Broadband is another challenge. How can you fire a ranger that's going to be in the north end of Grand Teton that can't communicate with the daycare center to find out how the kids are doing? So it's all sorts of infrastructure and management issues that's going to require cooperation at the highest levels of government. And it's hard, you won't see this, but you maybe get a sense of it, that in 5-month period, twice the number of people that live in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming are going to visit this area. Twice as many people, 9 million people. That's a lot of toilets being flushed. Yeah. It's a lot of trash being hauled out. It's a lot of rangers providing for lost families. And again, a tremendous amount of pressure. And the funding process about how you pay for that, and I want to leave that with everybody that's in a position to think about this going forward, is fundamentally flawed. It costs you $35 a day for a car for a week for a family of 4 to come into a national park. That's $5 a day, $1.25 per person to visit one of the premier areas in the world. Compare that to going to Albertsons and buying a grande black coffee, $3.33 with tax. You go see Deadpool and the Wolverine, is that right, down at the theater right next door, $10 a person. And if you want to take your family to see the Masai Mara in Kenya, that's $200 a day per person to visit Kenya. And you can argue the world-class viewing of wildlife in Yellowstone is right up there with the best in Africa. Yeah. So it's a fundamentally flawed model of how we think about national parks. And I would hope that a new administration can get off the ground quickly working with Congress and start rethinking about how we look at all of these things. I have some other notes, but I think you just plowed right through them about the importance of getting people in the job quickly. So I'm going to stop here and turn it over to the person that kept me out of so much trouble. I was an interior and still is.
And of course, Rob is referring to Karen Budd-Falen. She was the deputy solicitor at the Department of the Interior, and she was Rob's lawyer at Interior because she served for Wildlife and Parks and Interior, and she worked with Rob on revising ESA regulations, which Pete Ricketts and I deal with on the EPW committee in the Senate. So Karen, another longtime friend, and her daughter's here with her today, who not only interned for me, but is teaching as an adjunct professor at the University of Wyoming College of Agriculture, of which I'm a graduate, so it's nice to have you here, Sarah. Karen, help us, because you were in the belly of the beast on the legal side, help us understand where we need to go.
So as Cynthia said, I'm Karen Budd-Falen. I was a private property rights attorney in Wyoming, and then I went back to the Trump administration. And the one thing about looking at regulations and writing regulations, and especially now after the local right decision, which overturned Chevron, is that we're going to rely a whole lot more on congressional record and what did Congress intend when you guys wrote laws. And the problem with so many laws that have been written is that they're broad enough you could drive a Mack truck through them. And discerning what Congress intended is what we tried to do. And so, for example, when working with David Bernhardt, I wrote the ESA regulations for Department of Interior. And so we would go back and pour through legislative history to try to figure out, what does critical habitat really mean? Does that mean something that a species may live on someday? And given climate change and global warming or cooling or whatever it is we're in now, is my ranch in Wyoming going to someday be critical habitat for a polar bear? And so we've got to protect it now, which means that you cannot, quote, adversely modify designated critical habitat on your private property, because someday a polar bear may show up on my ranch in Wyoming. That's what Biden did. And so when Trump comes in as a new president, we need to really look at the agency regulations. And because now there's no deference to say what David Bernhardt wanted or Holland wanted or whoever wanted, we now have to really look at the legislative history and figure out, what did Congress want? And frankly, I'm thrilled with the local right decision, because you guys are the one writing the legislation. It shouldn't be some unnamed bureaucrat in some agency somewhere just making it up off the top of their head. So for you guys, I would say you really now need to look at what you're passing or what you're amending and really think about building a record that I can use to write law or to write a regulation. Because the record now is your voice, not what I think because I'm a bureaucrat in the Department of Interior or EPA or whatever the heck it is. So I think that that's one thing that people really need to consider. The other thing I would say is, I think one of the things that David Bernhardt implemented at Interior that really helped us get going on the ground was timelines. And they were very aggressive timelines. And so he'd come into us and he'd say, okay, we're going to revise the critical habitat regulation, and you have to get a draft on my desk in 3 weeks. So we'd set up the team, and I'd say, okay, I need your draft in 2 weeks so that I have time to review it. Timelines are critical. And if you're going to get the agencies to move in a direction, you got to have politicals that name timelines and enforce timelines to get them to move. And if they don't make the timeline, then do it yourself. Don't just send stuff back to the agency. Say, this, I don't like this rock, bring me a new rock. I don't like this rock, bring me a new rock. The way we did it at Interior is, if you didn't like the rock the bureaucrats gave you, you wrote it. End of story.
Thank you. Go ahead, Pete.
Great, well, thank you.
Great, thank you, Karen. So here's what we're gonna do, is I'm gonna ask a question, and all three of you are gonna get to answer. That could be fun. So, actually, it's a good one, we've already touched on, we've talked about a lot of things with regard to, you mentioned the Chevron deference, about what that, gives the, actually Congress power to actually legislate, because that's what we're supposed to do, not have bureaucracies to legislate. We've got a lot of other things that we've got to fix, about executive actions, all that sort of thing. What I'm going to do is ask you if, kind of a similar question we had before. First 100 days, what do you think, if you were advising the Trump administration, first 100 days, what is the most important thing to do? Andrew, we're going to start with you.
Thank you. First, I think it depends on, for the regulations, at what stage of the litigation each regulation is. Some may be further along, and we can trust the courts to maybe overturn or remand a regulation back to the agency. I thought the Biden administration made a mistake, and I talked about this on Larry Kudlow's show this spring, in trying to get all the regulations out before the Congressional Review Act deadline, instead of waiting for the local decision. Because I think a lot of the regulations are open to reinterpretation under the local Chevron deference case. In particular, the Clean Power Plan regulation and the EV battery, the CAFE standards, because both of those are major pivots from what the agencies have done in the past. And I think the Trump administration should claw back those regulations that violate the local case and reassess. So you think in the first 100 days, we can just take those back and immediately start that process? It takes, this is the unfortunate thing, it takes 4 to 6 years to get a major regulation through not only the regulatory process, but also through the courts. And we're only looking at 4 years, which is where we got hung up on the first Trump administration. We only had that first 4 years, and we lost 2017. So we only had 3 years, but we got out more major regulations at EPA in those 3 years than in any other 3-year period of EPA's history, but we weren't there to defend them in the courts. So we also need to worry about the 2028 election too, if people aren't thinking about that yet.
And Rob, next, and I want to ask either you or Karen, or maybe both of you, as you're addressing this question, could you also address the grizzly bear? Thanks.
He used to do this to me at Interior too. All right, so there's a couple of things. One is if you're an attorney and you watch litigation, everybody knows about suicide. They always talk about it, but before Biden, it was basically you file a lawsuit and the settlement would be, we're going to withdraw whatever regulation you were suing over and write a new regulation. You watch what justice has done in Biden? They've actually said in the settlement, we'll write a new regulation and we'll write it this way. Much narrower, actually focused requirement to write a regulation that says, whatever the plaintiff wanted it to say. I've talked to people, talked to David Bernhardt about this a lot, is we need to keep that litigation focus of writing settlements to actually force the regulation to say what we want it to say, instead of just, okay, I withdraw the regulation and I start over. Because I think you're going to get a lot better regulations if the plaintiff is actually helping to direct the regulation instead of just, oh yeah, we're going to withdraw. So I think that would shorten the process. The next thing I would do in the first 100 days is we got to deal with NEPA. I mean, Congress did a great deal when they passed the Builder Act, and they took a bunch of the Trump stuff we did. I was on the writing team for the NEPA regs. And the Builder Act took a whole bunch of Trump stuff, and they added it into legislation. That's really good. 2 big holes, Congress. This is directed at you. One, you did not define what a major federal action was, and that's a problem. We need to narrow what is a major federal action so that you don't have to do NEPA every time you sneeze. I mean, NEPA is NEPA, and you've got to do it, but we need to actually define what major federal action is, and that was left out of the Builder Act.
Amen.
The other thing that we need to look at is when we wrote the Trump regs, we tried to narrow the ways you could litigate over it. And so we flipped the way the agencies would do is we said, you've got to come out with a very strong initial notice of intent to write a regulation. Instead of just saying, here's our notice of intent, we're going to write a regulation regarding X, or here's our notice of intent, we've got to do a NEPA on an oil and gas project. You actually have to, in the notice, say what you're looking at, what the general alternatives are, how you're going to do that, and come out of the box with that, so that you narrow the amount of comments you get. And I think that will help streamline the NEPA process. Because if you didn't comment on the notice of intent, then you can't litigate. And so we were trying to narrow the pool of litigants. And so I would really look at the way we structured that. It was, the bureaucrats went nuts, but I think that structure would help you with that NEPA problem, because NEPA is a gigantic problem for all of us. Yeah. I would also have everybody watch the new 7 counties Supreme Court case. That's on narrowing the range of alternatives, because one of the things the Builder Act did not do is it did not say the agency can only consider alternatives within the scope of its authority. And so the 7 counties case that's in front of the Supreme Court now is a case that says, we're hoping the Supreme Court will say, federal agency, when you're looking at alternatives, you can only talk about what you have the jurisdiction to do, not everything in the world that you don't have the jurisdiction to do. And I think that would help that as well.
Rob, bring us home.
You can see what you got me out of trouble for so much. And one of my favorite things about working with Karen is she had the absolute respect from the career solicitors at the Department of the Interior. They loved working for her, and I think vice versa. It was a good team with good direction. But it goes back to a thought that Thomas Edison used to say. It said that vision without execution is a hallucination, and we've got to figure out how to get that execution cranking in the first 100 days. In my division, Karen and I had 568 wildlife refuges, 423 national park units, 27,000 employees, $7 billion in a budget. And out of that big portfolio, there were literally 30 people within that 27,000 person workforce that had some control over. You could grade them, you could manage them, you could reward them, you could penalize them. So you need a team that can come in quickly, that understands the folkways of those departments. And like you did so well, get the career people that kind of climb on board and buy into what you were trying to do. And that's going to be a big help with members of Congress and staff, is help us with the vetting process. You get tied up with the Office of Government Ethics, some 25-year-old at the White House going through every social media post that you may have written in your entire lifetime, FBI background checks. And it's a far cry from the days when FDR nominated William O. Douglas to be Supreme Court Justice, and he was confirmed in 3 weeks. So it's a different world, but you all can help us get those barriers down so we can get people in the administration working.
Well, I want to thank our panelists and ask them all to serve on the transition team and or return to the Trump administration, because we have 3 people in front of us who moved mountains while they were there. Bruce, did you have a follow-up question? Here's that.
Right.
Oh, Brian, I'm so sorry.
No problem. I represent the 36th District of Texas, and I really appreciate what the Senator, Governor, other Senator, and our 3 Trump folks have said. One of the biggest challenges that we have, if we roll the dice in November, we win all 3, both houses and the White House back. Because I've talked to numerous people, Bernhardt, Mr. Zinke, many people who served in the Trump administration, Mike Pompeo. They didn't clean house. And the big obstacle to cleaning house are federal employee unions, and just quite frankly, inertia up there. And I heard Secretary Pompeo told me personally, he says, I was dealing with 3 State Department unions, and I could not hire people. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon the House and the Senate to make something happen so that we can, I'm not an attorney, but we've got to be able to do something to get these people cleaned out of there, or they're going to obstruct everything again, as they did during the entire Trump administration. What can we do?
Mr. Wheeler.
It is a huge problem. I think we had 5 unions at EPA. And the biggest union at EPA, the Biden administration just rewrote their contract this year, giving them a lot more power and authority and protections against being fired. So it's going to be even harder next year because of the new union contract. And it was a huge problem. I don't have a solution, but it's going to take either congressional or an executive order to address that.
We have a couple more questions, so we're going to stand for just a minute. The first comes from Paul Bonapaz. Paul?
Hi, I'm with Rare Element Resources. We're a mining and technology company out of Wyoming in the rare earth field. We have a Bear Lodge mine that we're developing in northeastern Wyoming, as well as technology, $50 million demo project we're building right now with the DOE. So my question is, what can be done to ensure permitting for mining projects, specifically a critical mineral project like RER's Rare Earth project, to make sure that it's effective and streamlined? You may have seen in the last week, there was a report that it takes 29 years in the United States to go from discovery to production of a mine. We're second worst in the world behind Namibia. So that makes it really hard to reasonably compete with China's monopoly. With ongoing talks in this matter, the bipartisan legislation that you mentioned, managing Barrasso as well as yours, or the fast 41 permitting designation, how can projects like Bear Lodge ensure timely trajectory for permitting?
Thanks for that question, Paul. Which of our panelists wants to take a swing at it?
I want just a quick response. I don't know if you have other panelists. Sure. As with the last 3 years with Governor Youngkin in Virginia, I'm running his Office of Regulatory Management. We did permitting reform. We put on, right now, 90 to 95% of all Virginia permits are available online, so you can see exactly where the process permit is by a Gantt chart. And we've seen at a Virginia Department of Environmental Quality over the last year and a half, a 40% increase in the time it takes, a decrease in the time it takes to get a permit issued. It's permits.virginia.gov. Recommend everybody take a look at it. That's something I'm going to be working with the transition team to see what we can do administratively in a second term. The legislation is great, but we have to, in order to have a process improvement, you have to measure how long it takes first, then you can improve how long it takes.
Can I just piggyback on that for a second as well? Because Andrew's spot on. We did the same thing in Nebraska when I was governor. We got the time to issue air construction permits in like 198 days down to 65 days. You Lean Six Sigma. So yes, there's lots of things we need to be doing from a legislative standpoint to streamline the permitting process. But frankly, administratively, if you come in and do what Andrew did with regard to the Lean program in EPA, we can start streamlining. It doesn't change any sort of requirements, but just streamline how you get that stuff done, do the process mapping, doing it better. We can actually speed up the time to get those permits out. We demonstrated it, they demonstrated it, the federal government can do it too, and it's one of the things that, as we look into a Trump administration, getting people in there that will help us do that streamlining of just administratively what we can do through like a Lean program.
Karen?
I think the other thing that we need to do is really get some more teeth into CEQ, because it's not just the permit from the agency, you also have to do National Environmental Policy Act, you have to go through ESA Section 7 consultation, you have to go through consultation under the National Historic Preservation Act, and that stuff all adds time too. So what we need to do is not just look at the permitting, say, from EPA. We've got to build in a process to do all those permits simultaneously, because right now what they're doing is they're doing one permit, and then you do the WEPA, and then you do NHPA, and then you do ESA. And we've got to push that all so that everything is occurring at the same time, and that's going to cut your permitting time by a huge amount.
We did that in Virginia.
Yeah.
So Karen, they're right. I mean, sometimes we overlook CEQ and how they can assist the process or bog it down. So I have a couple of asks for everyone here. Where's Andrew Williams? Andrew, would you stand up? Give us names of people who would be good in the Trump administration, either as agency administrators or at CEQ. That one's pivotal. My other request, and here's something I'm going to ask you to give to Andrew while you're here. Help us define major federal action. So if you have a good definition in your head, please give it to Andrew. We'll kind of aggregate the ideas, and maybe we can come up with a definition that could be incorporated into law that would really help define what is truly major. Panel, oh wait, Ralph has a question.
Let me just add, I'm Ralph from South Carolina, Orlando's OC. What the Senator said about we only have 20 months to get this done. Y'all are valuable because you've been on the inside. We major in the minor in politics, in Caucus. We don't have the timeline to do that. So tell us a roadmap within a 20-month, whatever, that, so we won't get bogged down with Jamie Raskin's detailed nothing, which he majors in. And you're right, David Barnhart, everybody ought to read his book.
Yeah.
You answer to me. Help us do that, and because we don't know what we don't know. Thank you all for coming.
Great comment, great way to wrap up this fabulous panel. Thank you so much, panelists.